So good morning and welcome to our annual update for, can you believe it, 2015. I think the only one I missed was 2011, so I've been doing annual updates now for 20 years. As you know, we like to film these. All the seminars are filmed, so they all come down on our website in about 2 weeks' time with a bit of luck. They'll be edited and divided into chapters. And the idea of the chapter is you don't have to sit and watch for more than sort of half an hour, three-quarters of an hour at a time. Although some will be shorter and some will be longer. So what I thought we'd do is we start off with a little bit of old material, and then we'll get straight into the clinical approach using some of the new ideas that I'd expand upon as we go along. But some 5 or 6 years ago, I came across this system of digital photography where you take a picture of the face and then you split it into two and build two faces. And when I came across this at a conference in Moscow, I was intrigued by the idea of it and tracked down the professor who'd sort of pioneered the work. And he was basically a psychologist, and his mission from the government, from the Russian government at that time, was to see if there was a way of detecting terrorists at airports by taking a photograph of them, or there was a facial recognition of a terrorist. So he took studied many photographs of terrorists, and he came to the conclusion that you could detect a terrorist. And if you're interested, I'll tell you how you do this afterwards. And I'm always fascinated because I always seem to sit next to one on the airplane. When I look at the person's face, I think, no, okay. So anyway, the professor taught me. I did a week literally one-to-one with him. And he taught me very accurately how to do the photographs, how to split them with a computer program. And we have that program available. We've had it for some years. And I was just sort of thinking about, at the moment, with the general election in May this year and the recent one, that I'd do one of the current politicians just to sort of open up. So I won't mention any names, really, because it is being videoed. But the thing about this program is you do a straight cut down the middle from the top of the bridge of the nose there, through the nose, and through to the chin. So you get exact left and right hemisphere, or left and right face. And it's surprising how few faces look symmetrical when you build two left faces and two right faces. And in some cases, they're very different. And what this actually means. And the professor taught me to recognize whether this person, or both portraits, as he calls them, are in control of their life or not. So you're looking at two parts of the person. In other words, you're looking at two brains, because they're mostly the facial and trigeminal nerves which control the muscles on the face. And these are directly affected from different lobes in the brain, but are influenced very much by the frontal cortex and our thinking. So a person who's in control of their life looks basically happy in both portraits. But a person who's not in control of their life could look unhappy in both, or unhappy in one and happy in another. But you have to be happy in both portraits. So that's up to you to interpret. But what he first of all used to do was the angle of the eyes of the orbit. So you look from the medial to the lateral part of the orbit. So you're looking to see whether the angle there is horizontal, acute, or graph in the way that the angle is. The second one is the nasal labial fold. That's from the large intestine meridian point here down to the side of the mouth. Okay, so that's called the nasal labial fold. Okay, that's the second one that you're looking for. So let's have a look at also the lips. So you know sometimes people's lips are like this, sometimes they're like that, and sometimes they're like that. Beware of somebody like that, because they're happy on one side and sad on the other, unless they got Bell's palsy, of course. So there's three things that you sort of look for immediately. When you see the two portraits, when I'm going to split them, those are the three things you look for. So you're looking to see whether the person is happy in both portraits, whether they're in control of their life, whether you can see a difference and how big that difference is. And you could score it on the basis of 1, 2, 3. So the angle of the eyes, is it different on one side? The nasolabial folds, are there more prominent on one side than the other, or a different angle? And the angle of the mouth. So when you have a police mugshot done, when you're taken in on a Saturday night at 2:30 in the morning, they stand you up there and you are not allowed to smile. Not you probably are by that time anyway, but and they take the photograph and you've got to be just like that. But you can tell an awful lot about a person when they are just standing there, okay? Now, some people are happy, aren't they? They're in control of themselves. And some people are naturally sad, and some people are sort of somewhere in the middle. So what happens is, when they take that photograph of you at the airport, you don't always have that. But if you've been to Syria 4 times this year, or Somaliland, on your passport, they're likely to photograph you. And that photograph goes down a tube, or electric wires now, and somebody very quickly looks at your portrait and analyzes it and then feeds it back. So you can do it really fast once you get to know how to do it. And the professor sold the program because he was working actually for the government to the Russian government. The Americans took it up and the Israelis took it up first of all. So anywhere where there was security there, we now use it as well, apparently, but it's all top secret as far as what it is. But I hope by the end of the weekend you can tell, terrorists and things. Now, what he told me, is that the right face primarily represents the right brain. And we know the right brain is generally considered to be the creative one. So when you come up with an idea, or you think about an idea, you're thinking in your right brain. When it's a logical part and you're thinking about the past and the linear mathematics of things, it's left brain. Okay. So left brain equates with memory of the past, logic, whereas the right brain is thinking about new ideas. So you can extend this out that the ideal person would be Simon Cowell, who would be a blend of both. If you look at Simon Cowell's face, he's perfectly symmetrical. He's a creative thinker in the right brain, and he's a very logical business person on the left side. So there are people like this around. So you should be able to detect where a person's coming from. Are they coming primarily from their right brain or from the left brain? Okay, so you can see this with the person. Now, in this case, we'll start off with this one. The answer to this one is that, let's split him up. So there's the right and there's the left. This is right and left is nothing to do with politics, by the way. Don't get confused. Okay, so that's the right face, that's the left face. And the amazing thing this is he's pretty symmetrical, isn't he? Really, he's pretty symmetrical. The angle of the eyes is pretty good. Sometimes it's difficult to get the width of the face precise. If there's a slight turn in the photograph, it's difficult if they've already turned it, unless it's 100% like the police photograph, right down the middle there. You have to take the best of what you can get off the internet and the newspapers. But generally, if you do the angle of the eyes, the nasolabial folds and the mouth, this is a person who's in control. And they're pretty even. I'd be pretty much hard to say whether he was left brain, right brain. Which one he's coming from. Now, I won't say any more. Okay. No, it's not Doctor Who. Okay. Now, anybody like to make a comment? Because you really can't see this by looking at a portrait straight on. Okay. You have to see the split face. You really can't tell. You cannot see what's going on either side unless you've got, a very good mind. Now, you have to determine which brain you think this person is coming from. All right, don't say anything, but you can talk to your neighbor, but don't shout out, what it is. Okay, are you ready? Now, which one is he coming from? I probably don't have to tell you that. It's that one, isn't it? Okay. Well, this is a logical person. This is a person from the past. This is a person who has logic. You do this, do that, measure this, 100, everything is linear there. This is his creative side. Okay? So you could say this person is left brain dominant, for sure. It's a nice example of, a big difference. The program we have built for ourselves is lucky because we can actually correct the direction of the head. We can't turn the head that way in a photograph, but we can correct it. So some of the pictures are taken with, a slight tilt on the head angle, but the program will actually correct that. And you can make all sorts of corrections on the program. But so we straightened his head out, and I was quite amazed with what came out when we split the photograph. So, okay, so you think that's a bit of fun? You watch the next one. Okay, you won't know probably who this one is. Anybody know who that one is? What? Yes. Somebody knows. Okay. Okay. He's the elected new leader of the Liberal Democrats. Okay? So he's quite interesting, isn't he? Because he really, you don't know where he's coming from, really, if anything's coming through at all, really. With his left brain or right brain. So next one. Now, would you say this man is left-brained or right-brained by looking at the face? You see, one of the ways Professor Alf taught me is he said, look at the face and see if you can see which eye he's coming from and is looking at you. Okay? That will help you to know which brain he's coming from. Okay, so you can do this by determining whether the person's left brain or right brain dominant with the eyes. So just have a look and see if you can see which eye he's coming from, or which brain you think he's coming towards you. So if you said the left one, you see that one is looking at you. This one is looking at, he's converging, isn't he? So he's actually coming from the left, which means probably the left brain. He's happy. He's very happy. This one he hasn't got a clue. Okay. So you see, we can see left brain people are working in the past a lot, aren't they? They're working on figures, numbers, x equals so and so. And, he's really very good at this, isn't he? He can quote you any figure, any number from any bit in the past, okay? But creation, a different matter, right brain. Now, any guesses here? What? Left. That one. She's looking at you from the left. Okay, let's see what we see. Pretty sad, isn't it? Yeah. There's a lot of sadness in there. So, really, this one is a fatter face, which could reflect that there's a slight tilt to the camera that way. But it's pretty much the same, isn't it? This is a person who's pretty much left and right brained, really. But are they in control of their life? In that way, would you say that this person is coming forward and in control of their life and knows where they're going and things? Anyway, interesting, isn't it? Can you imagine if you were put up there now? I've done it. I put you up, have I? Okay. I won't. What were you? You can't remember. Okay. Right. So let's get down to some work now. So I like the work of Jeff Bland. I followed Jeff for many, many years, since the late 70s when I first heard some tapes on Metabolic Update, it was called, that he used to produce. And then I met him in the early 90s, and we actually did a couple of seminars together in the UK, and you're shaking your head. There's somebody, surely nobody's been on those. Julian, did you come on those? They were Jeff Bland. They were in Bath. Yes, that's right. And then we did them in Belgium. They were good times, very early 1990s. But one of the things he really likes to emphasize, and what we want to emphasize over the weekend, is we are composites of multiple systems. So we are a matter of a large number of different biological systems that work together. Pay attention to the web of interrelating factors, know what it is that links our genitourinary tract to our nervous system, to our gut, etc., together. Because we're one of the few professions that can actually do this, and we don't specialize in one particular aspect, or most of us don't, of just looking at one biological system and only treating that and not treading into the realms of somebody else. So what I've come to over the years to put things together is a very simple sort of approach, which when you look at a person, we've really got to look at them from two aspects. And one of them is the inherited polymorphisms. So we inherit our genetic makeup from our mother and from our father. And as we know, there are 23 paired chromosomes. And in total, there's about 24,000 genes. I don't know why they can't make up their mind exactly how many it is, but there's about 24,000 genes. And we know that there's about 150,000 proteins that these encode for, which means that each gene is able to encode for more than one protein. Because originally with the Human Genome Project back in the 1990s and early 2000s, it was assumed, because there were 150,000 proteins that are identified to date in the body, that there would be 150,000 genes. So it was quite a shock when the different people put their research together and found that it was only 24,000, especially when they found that some insects like fruit flies had something like 20,000 genes. So we weren't that much farther advanced. And some animal species have more genes. So intelligence and things doesn't necessarily run with the number of genes. So what they came to the conclusion is that a gene must have more than one code in it for more than one protein. And we know that the proteins make up the building blocks of the body. We know that they make up the substrates for most of the neurotransmitters and most of the hormones in the body. They make up the antibodies in the body. And they make up all the enzymes. So all the enzymes are proteins. Okay? So every time we mention about an enzyme, it's a protein. But not all proteins are enzymes, of course. Okay? So what they found is, and we'll go through this when we look at the epigenetics, is there's a covering, a protein covering to the gene. And depending upon which part of the gene is exposed with the genetic code there, is which part is read. So if I only expose this part of my arm here, it can only read that, but that may encode for a protein. Okay? Whereas if I only expose this part, that encodes for a different protein. So each gene can have multiple, possibly hundreds of different codes in the one gene. Okay, so it depends upon how much of the protein is pulled apart. So the question is, what pulls the protein apart? And Bruce Lipton came up with some very interesting concepts, that the cell membrane has receptor sites in there, which are made of proteins or amino acids, and that some amino acids are positively charged and some are negatively charged. If you remember, I demonstrated this last year on the update with some pipe work. So when you have a protein, which is a string of amino acids, if they have a charge on them, positive or negative, it bends the pipe at 90 degrees. So a protein is not as linear. It's a structure which has bends and curves in it. So when something attaches to the protein or to the amino acid there, it changes the polarity. And so literally the shape of the pipe changes its shape. And that mechanically pulls microfibrils from the receptor site into the nucleus and will actually expose the gene. So whatever attaches to the cell membrane potentially can expose the gene, for good or bad, because we may have genes in here which we don't want to read. And we may have genes in there which we do want to read and expose. So there'll be some good genes, like tumor suppressor genes, and there may be some ones which are pro-carcinogenic. So we want to keep the tops on those or keep those covered over. So when we come to look at the epigenetics, we'll be looking particularly at methylation, which keeps basically the tops on the genes, and acetylation, which takes them off. So we need both. Sometimes we need to take the top off so we can expose a good gene, and sometimes we need to put the top back on it if it's a bad one, which we've inherited from mum and dad. So inherited polymorphisms, but the difficulty is, how do we tell what we've got and what we're exposed to and what we're not expressing? Okay. So what we want to do today, certainly, is to be able to find out what polymorphisms or slight anomalies called single nucleotide polymorphisms we all have inherited. So we've probably got multiples of this, but there'll be one which is more important up front with us than anything else. And we've all got this. It's not that you're a mutation or you got a mutation. We've all got lots of mutations. But there'll be one which is your primary one, or what we call a definitive one, which will be, expressing itself more than anything else. Then, once our genetic code is written in stone from that moment, we then have to express that for good or bad, and we can change it, make it worse if we take a lot of toxins in, etc., and we get nutritionally deficient. And so we acquire conditions. And these may change our polymorphisms and change our sort of body settings. And this is called adaptation. So we all talk about, adaptations, that we've adapted to our problem. Because if you don't adapt to a problem, you die. So you have to adapt. If you're under stress, your adrenal glands go up, and maybe other glands go down as a result of that. So it's called adaptation. But we get stuck in that adaptation, and that adaptation causes the symptoms that we see with our patients. So when the patient comes to see us, they've got the symptoms of adrenal problems, but the cause could be somewhere remote. So it's getting a person back into their normal genetic expression for them, and then you'll see what it is that changed their genetic expression and threw them into adaptation, which is, it's a lot to take on board, the possibility, but there's a very easy way of determining this. So, inherited polymorphism and acquired. So you must look at what is the base, because if there is a polymorphism here that encodes for a greater need for a particular nutrient to get that enzyme or that protein to express itself better, it's fundamental. It doesn't really matter what you do here. You're never going to get the person better until you've corrected the genetic or made the best of the genetics of what the person's got. We can't alter that. What we can do is we get them to express it in a better way. And this is what's called epigenetics. So epigenetics are factors that influence the gene, because the gene already has the polymorphism. But if that polymorphism encodes for a greater need, let's say for pyridoxal 5-phosphate, the activated form of B6, then unless you take the B6 or prescribe that to the patient, they're not going to be able to express those enzymes. And so you're going to find the person's going to be deficient in this and that. Any of the pyridoxal 5-phosphate dependent enzymes could go into a state of adaptation. And how we see adaptation is through two systems in the body, through the neurotransmitter or neural adaptation, and through the hormones or hormonal adaptation. And usually it's both, of course. So for quick-acting adaptation to a problem, we use our nerves or our neurological system. And for slow, longer-acting adaptation, we use our hormonal system. So therefore, we can use the nervous system or the hormones to measure where the adaptation has actually occurred in the person. But remember, you'll be measuring the adaptation and not the problem, because the problem still remains fundamental within the genes. So we can measure hormones and neurological by our methods that we're trained in, that we'll cover. But how do we measure the inherited polymorphisms is something we've done for years using the different nucleotide bases and giving you the codes to do that. So my protocol would be to do the following with a patient, regardless of what they come in with, more or less. So a patient presents, and where do you start? So this is what I'm not going to do this because I want to train you, first of all, into what it's all about. But this we'll go through at the beginning. So what I do is I tap across extensor reflexes. So you're all familiar with that, to make sure neurologically the reflex is going from one leg round the spinal cord up to the brain and back down again. Okay? So you expect with that when you tap the patellar reflex on the left, the right quadricep will become inhibited or go weak. Because when the left leg goes forward, which is what it's simulating, the right one has to be relaxed, and then the reverse occurs the other way around. Otherwise, if that reflex, when it's tapped, the opposite quad stays on and doesn't go weak, it means that when the left leg goes forward, the right leg wants to go forward as well. And when the right leg goes forward, the left one wants to go forward. So the person ends up adapting with a short stride. So you see people like this, don't you? They wander along, but there's no swing to the arms, and there's no stretching out with the legs. Because every time the right leg goes forward, the left one wants to go forward as well. So if you're an athlete, you can imagine what will happen. A quad or a hamstring is going to go twang, because it's on when it should be off. So it's one of the most simple ways of measuring the cross-extensor reflexes. You can do it more complicated and go through the reflexes in every single joint in the body. But in the end, you come to more or less the same conclusion, that it's a spinal or mechanical problem, which is causing like a block. So if you tap the reflex and you don't get the necessary opposite quad to become inhibited, it means there's a vertebral obstruction somewhere to the neurological message. So in the end of the day, and you can make it as complex as you want, but the easiest way is just to therapy localize each of the vertebra and the key points until you restore the reflex. Okay? So it's as easy as that. Now, where do you start? You always start at the top, because the mechanoreceptors put in 80 or 90% of all neurological input to the brain, the mechanoreceptors. And they are arranged rostral to caudal, which means top to bottom. So there's more mechanoreceptors, or proprioceptors as sometimes called, in the top of the neck than there are in the middle of the neck, and there's more in the middle of the neck than the bottom of the neck, and so on down through the body. So there's more in the shoulder joint than the hand, and there's more in the arm than there are in the legs. Okay, so we start from the top upwards. And what a lot of people like to do is actually start with the temporomandibular joint, because there's a lot of input from the temporomandibular joint there. So we're looking for mechanoreceptor input. So when you tap the reflex, if you don't get the response, in other words, the opposite quad doesn't go away, you therapy localize from the top down. And when we come to looking at mechanical problems, we'll show you the procedure. So it's always top down until you find which one it is. Okay, so that's the first thing I'll do. The second one is I find their constitutional body type acetate. That's the standard sort of red, green, and blue acetates, which you're familiar with. So you learn a little bit about the body constitution, what things people are sensitive to, what foods that they're good with, and what nutrients, and so on, the type of diet. Number 3 is the subconscious emotions. Is there an imbalance in the amygdala on the right to the left and the left to the right? So we need to balance that. Because if you're running a subconscious program, again, it's a state of adaptation which we need to solve. And we usually solve that by finding which side it is that weakens, and then using the Miron torch. There's other ways of doing it, but the Miron light into the umbilicus while they're therapy localizing the side that goes weak. We can incorporate here the emotional stress reflexes at this time, which we use a little bit lower than the standard sort of frontal eminences there. We tend to use slightly between the eyebrow here and halfway between that and the frontal eminence out there. But which we found the most important thing with here is to compare left to right. So we put the fingers on the emotional stress point on one side to the other and then reverse them. Okay, so rather than just doing the two straight on together, we compare the right to the left and then the left to the right. So it's a comparison of the two. And a lot of people will show that up where they don't show it bilaterally. And then again, we treat it in the standard way with the Miron light into the umbilicus at this stage. Then I like to check the body clock to make sure the body clock is correct. This is the superficial flow of energy in the body. Okay, energy flows in different levels, and in Chinese medicine you have a superficial flow and you have a deeper CT1, or the 5 elements. So this is the superficial flow of energy from one meridian to the next, And if we look at our the clock there, it's 10:30, which you immediately say is 9:30. Okay, so maybe that other clock is more accurate if it was set half an hour. So 10:30 is 9:30, which immediately the patient thinks, what's he talking about? Okay, because you have to go back to standard times, don't you? And we're very fortunate here because we're so close to Greenwich, which is precisely when it's 10:30, it's 10:30, isn't it? If you go to Cornwall, to the Land's End in Cornwall, there could be as much as 4, 5, 6 minutes difference because you're heading further west. So 10:30 won't come technically in the body for another 4 or 5 minutes. If you go east, in the same way, the next time zone from here, true time zone, is on the border between Poland and Belarus. Okay, so it's a long way before you actually get an hour ahead. Right? So remember that in Europe, apart from Portugal, most of Europe is set 1 hour ahead of us, artificially. They don't like that because they call it European time, but they are set 1 hour ahead of us. So in the wintertime, in the summertime, they're 2 hours ahead of Greenwich Mean Time. And in the wintertime, they're 1 hour ahead, okay? But they're not really. But they set their clocks artificially to get longer daylight and things. So The only exception to that, really, I think, is, of course, Greece, who are 2 hours ahead. So when you go to Greece, they are set 2 hours ahead of our time here, okay? Which is nonsense, really, because they're not far enough east to be able to do that, really. Because if you go then east of Greece, in Turkey and Israel, they're only 1 hour ahead. Okay? So Greece has already set itself away from everybody else and put themselves 2 hours ahead for whatever reason. So very confusing. So the body does not change. Okay, we change our clocks, but our body does not change our clock. So if it's 10:30 now, it's 9:30 biological time, all right, here. Okay. So when we come to looking and setting the body clock, if it's out and the now time, which is now, is wrong, then we tap ourselves or we tap the patient back into the correct time, which is 9:30. And 9:30 is spleen time. So between 9 o'clock in standard time and 11 o'clock, it's spleen time. And what that means is that the spleen meridian has a little bit more energy in it than the other meridians. Okay? It doesn't mean that they're in excess spleen, that they've got an overabundant spleen. It just means they've got more energy at that particular time. So we all have waves, and we'll see these are the biological or circadian rhythms which run us. So at 11 o'clock in standard time, we go into heart time, which means we get more energy in our heart meridian, so we pump more blood, etc. So we'll be looking at those. So I will teach you how to reset the patient's body clock and your own as we go along. Now I like to do, and you don't have to do it at this stage, you can do it before or later. Sometimes I don't do it to the end of the treatment. I do 2 scales, because the only person who knows how a person is, truly, is the person. And by that, we really mean their subconscious mind, because they consciously, they don't know how they are. If I ask you, how are you? Nice to see you. You'll say, fine, won't you? And then I'll say, well, are you? And why have you come to see me then? And then they'll come out with this whole story. And then you think, gosh, they're far from fine, but are they 8 out of 10, or where would you score yourself? If someone says out of 10, how are you? And you think, well, actually, I don't know. I'm going to say 8. And surprisingly, men are optimistic. We always say 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. Someone might even say 10 out of 10. And women are pessimistic. I'm only 3. And you find they're actually 8. And of course, they're delighted then. Because they think the worst, but in fact they're not as bad as what they are, but some are. And same with men, of course. So men tend to be generally, if you ask them how they are, they tend to be optimistic, and women often are more pessimistic. Because we don't know how we are consciously, because how can you assess health or being all-encompassing, emotional, physical, and biochemical yourself? You can't really, can you? You can get a rough idea, but there is somebody who knows the answer, and that is you. But it's your subconscious, which is non-verbal. So how do you get a response out of a non-verbal database? Because the database, the subconscious is a database, that's all. There's nobody in there. You can't talk. You can put information into the database in your computer, but it's not going to answer. It can answer as a digital response there. So I like to tell the story of how I came to this conclusion. That many years ago, I went to see a hypnotherapist about an issue. And she said, that's no problem. She said, sit down and relax in my chair, Chris. So I thought, okay. And she said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you back. And she went through all the relaxation procedures, first of all, having your trip down the garden, and, being nice and relaxed and that sort of thing. And she said, now, I'm going to take you back in years. She said, and I can't remember, I was probably in my late 20s, early 30s then. And she said, we'll go back 1 year at a time, and we'll see if there's a year in your life when your issues were relevant. So I thought, oh yeah, okay, off you go. And she said, well, what will happen when there is an issue related to a time period? She said, the little finger on your right hand will go up. Well, I was conscious enough to think, oh yeah. And at that time, I was also extremely left-brained. So I thought, oh, okay. And when she got to a certain age, 13, I think it was, the finger went up. And I thought, well, I won't say the words. So, and then she went to 12 and it went down again. And then she said 7 and 6 and so on. And it went up 4 times. And she said, now what we're going to do is we're going to take each one of those, you come back and see me, and we'll have a session on 13, on 7 and 2 and so on. Which she did. She took me into deep hypnosis, and I actually changed when we got to something like 1 or something. Or I was younger than that, and I was going through breastfeeding, and my jaw, the muscles, the buccinator muscles, were going into complete spasm. And it was so intense, it was unbelievable. And I didn't understand what was happening because my head was changing shape. I could hear these bones in the head. I thought, hell, I'm actually changing physically. And the power of this muscle contraction was so great. Unbelievable. Retained primitive reflex, which was still there, of the suckling reflex. And it's subconscious. And I thought, wow, I haven't advanced very much further because, you put things in your mouth and you chew things, and that's the retained reflex still there you're still using. And this power of the suckling reflex is so great, incredible, that it can actually change the shape of my skull there. And I needed a bit of cranial after that to get it straightened out. But that was an interesting experience. But the point of what I was saying is, subconsciously, your body does know exactly. And I couldn't remember any of the events, particularly, that she wheedled out. So I thought, well, let's do the same thing with muscle testing. Because muscle testing is a non-verbal response, isn't it? So you ask a question or you make a statement. And this is what we do. We make a statement. And the statement is, on a scale of 1 to 100, if 100 is the best you have ever been in your life, health-wise, right now you calibrate at. Okay, so that would be the thing. When we come to do it, we'll do it on each other. Right? So that gives you a comparison of how you are now as to when you were at your best. Okay? Now, just to cheer us up, when we actually tried to do a long study about 5-6 years ago on when people were at their best, generally, the surprising thing was that women were 30 to 35. Because I thought it was going to be before they had children. Because when you ask a woman did you feel your best, most of them say before I had children. But in fact, it's generally the average was 30 to 35. And for a man, was 40 to 45. So again, it was a little later than what I thought. Because I thought a man would say, well, not 30 to 35, but it was actually 40 to 45. So whatever the age was when you were at your best, it's a comparison. Now, there are a few people who are at their best at the time that you do it. So they come in at 100%. It's not many, but it's because they've been having treatment with you and you prescribed the right things for them and got rid of the toxins and so on. So they're actually better than they've ever been. So it does occur. So it's just a comparison of when they were at their best. Now, the problem is that a lot of people have never been at their best. So what is their best? Because they've actually always been below par. And the reason is that their genes haven't been expressed in the right way because they haven't had the right things to get them to express and what their codes are. So now we do a second test. And the second test is if 100 is the best you could be in your life, if all your genes were expressing themselves in the optimal way. And we call this an epigenetic scale of health. Because in other words, we can't change the genes, but we can get them to work better. Okay? So if they encode, for instance, that you need a greater amount of pyridoxal 5-phosphate, given the fact you took pyridoxal 5-phosphate, etc., did everything you could, how good are you at the moment? So the second test, and this is probably a more accurate one, is if 100 is the best you could be in your health, and explain that health is all-encompassing, emotional, physical, biochemical, right now you calibrate at. And I've never found anybody higher epigenetically than the one where they are at the moment. Okay? So they could be the same, in which case, they move up and down the same. But most people are lower. Most people drop 10, 20, 30, 40 points, sometimes more. So in other words, you think, wow, this person is actually 90% of what they have been, but they're actually only 40% of what they could be. So in other words, they've been struggling with poor health all their life. They've been under par for years and years and years, which is very sad, really, because they've never been at their best. So this one, you'll find, really gets down to the nitty-gritty, the core, and it's the things that get the gene to work, to express itself better, which brings this right up. So you're not going to be happy with a person's progress until you've got that on the way to 100%. Because if their genetic makeup is 100% in the way it's expressing it for them, then you're likely to get this better, aren't you? So once you've got this better, this one will automatically go up, or this one may need a little bit of tinkering with. So let's give an example. This one may need some extra pyridoxal 5-phosphate because they've got a polymorphism of, say, guanosine into thymine, G into T. But this one could express itself that you need a bit of extra zinc. A bit of extra zinc probably won't make too much difference to your scale of health, but a coenzyme will. So generally we find here with an epigenetic scale, generally, and with polymorphisms, they encode for a greater need for a particular coenzyme. So coenzymes are, generally speaking, activated vitamin Bs, but we're going to learn there's 4 non-vitamin Bs which are coenzymes as well. So you've got S-adenosylmethionine, SAM, you've got alpha-lipoic acid, you've got CoQ10, and you've got vitamin C. So these are all coenzymes which are not vitamin Bs, but the rest of them are the active forms of vitamin B. So scale of health we'll do on each other, epigenetic scale of health we'll do on each other. Now, we want to find out next where you're coming from. Okay. Now, we looked at some photographs earlier of 5 politicians. 5, yes, it wasn't 6. 5 politicians. And what Avtanel, the professor in Moscow, he said, look at the person, Chris. And he said, you're measuring them too much. You're analyzing it, too much. He said, just look at the 2 faces. He said, where is this person coming from? Are they coming from the right brain, the left brain, or in the middle? Are they balanced there? Are they in control of their life, or are they not in control of their life? Are they happy? Are they sad? And so on. He said, look at them. Where are they coming from? And I didn't have a clue what he was talking about, first of all. But at the end of 7 days, I could do it, and get most of them right, pretty much by just looking. He said, you develop it. It's subjective. He said, I know. You start off objective and measuring the angles and doing all this. But he said, you'll be able to do it just like that. And that's what the people at the airports do. They just look at it, look at it, look at it. You can tell immediately. So what he was telling me is where that person's coming from. And he had a lovely 49 square grid. And I converted this grid into the meridians, and he was very pleased. He understood me because he was a psychologist, but he also was a physicist, and he understood that he could accept perfectly well meridians because he said they're flows of energy, and that made sense to him. And I put him into which grid belonged to which meridian. So I could say from the picture, this person comes from the large intestine meridian, and we could then verify that with our applied kinesiology against the large intestine, and we were right with it. So I couldn't understand really for a long time what he was talking about. Now I do, that he was saying, you're coming from somewhere which is you, where you come from, and it doesn't really change. And so we came up with the idea, we called this a definitive meridian. There was this something which is always there with you, which is at the back of you and always has been there, okay? And this definitive meridian is where it controls you, or is your central coordinating meridian. So everything about you is a spleen person or a heart person, small intestine person. And when you go out of that is when you go into a state of adaptation. So if you no longer are that particular person and you've gone into another meridian or physiological system, that's a state of adaptation. So we're going to look at the definitive meridian and what it really means and where each of us come from. And each meridian, as we've learnt through the years, is just a flow of energy, but it has a color associated with it. Now we know that if you put all colors together, you come up with white, don't you? Or clear light. So light is composed of 7 colors and various compositions of those colors. So we have 7, plus we have variations of combinations, but also variations between the 2, or complementary colors. So we're a mixture of different colors, and each meridian has a color. Okay? So when you put all the meridians together, if you like, you'd end up with chi, or life energy. So life energy, or chi, or prana, is, if you like, pure energy or white light. Okay? And then that's divided into the different meridians or flows of energy. So we're going to use those colors because they're coming from our meridians inside our energy fields. And these are called biophotons. This is light, as we'll see, that comes from inside us. Nothing to do with light coming from outside, from the sun, going through the three constitutional colors, the standard ones. That's photons of light from the sun. What we're looking at is the light that comes from within us. So this is really quite mind-blowing. We introduced it because they're using it now extensively throughout different specialities. Neurology are using it with lasers, and many fields are using it to stimulate brain function. And Francis Crick was the first real sort of person to put it in, Crick and Watson, but Crick of the DNA Structure Foundation. He was the first neurobiologist to switch genes on in the brain. With brain-damaged people, he was able to actually get neurons to fire by particular wavelengths of light through carbon fiber optics. So we're going to do biophotons and look at this and how to assess where people are coming from. And then we're going to synchronize the person back into where they should be, or from their definitive meridian. And using the biophoton acetates, we're going to, which should be the same then as the definitive meridian, we're going to use our eyes into distortion and find out what it is that's wrong. So if you've got a definitive meridian, you must have a definitive problem. In other words, is that problem a toxicity? Is it a deficiency? Is it a lack of energy? Is it hypoxia, whatever? So if you've got a definitive meridian, you must have a definitive problem if it's not right. And you must have a definitive answer. So that's all we've got to find, really, isn't it? So we know you've got a problem because you told us you've got a problem. What is that problem and what's the answer? Very simple, really, isn't it? All right, so we're going to find out what the problem is by the eye positions, and then we're going to find out, obviously how to treat it. And we're going to use a particular acetate wavelength of 380 nanometers, which was found by Karl Popp, a physicist in Germany in the 1970s, Fritz Popp rather, not Karl, to find out the polymorphisms within a person. So this is whether you're going expressing single nucleotide polymorphisms can be detected by using one acetate. And then you know that you've got to look into the polymorphisms. And these will always encode then as a change in the neurotransmitters with the person. So very, very important for all problems, but particularly emotional and psychiatric problems. And then we'll diagnose what the SNP is, or the single nucleotide polymorphism, and it's coded already for you. We've done the work years ago of every SNP has a particular coenzyme. So you've got 20 permutations, 20 possible SNPs, because you've got 5 bases, 5 nucleotide bases, which make up our DNA and our RNA. And so you've got a possibility of any one of those going into the wrong position, which will give you 5 by 4, which is 20. So you've got 20 permutations, and there happens to be 20 coenzymes. So every permutation has a coenzyme which will help to upregulate that particular pathway to get the best out of it. So that's all been done, and that's encoded in your manuals there. Then we come back and we re-challenge to see if there's any other meridians out of sync, and then we re-challenge the scales. And you don't let the patient out the door, hopefully, until you've got 100 on both those scales. So if the person is now calibrating with those remedies and what you've done, now obviously if you give the right remedy, the scale goes right up. Okay? And some things will make the person, maybe you need 2 or 3 things to get them right up, not just one. What surprised me, I suppose, is how little structural problems make a difference to a person's health. And I'm an osteopath, and I spend my time, years and years, treating people with mechanical problems. And their scale of health, particularly the epigenetic one, doesn't alter one iota. They feel better, less pain, more comfortable, but it hasn't fixed the underlying problem. Okay, so the problems tend to come back a lot. But if you give them some pyridoxal 5-phosphate or some zinc or something, and then they start to hold the mechanical adjustments that we make, well, more likely to hold if they've got the right nutrients. And you all know, because most of you do kinesiology, that Dr. Goodhart found out 30, 40 years ago that there are muscles associated with different organs and nerve supplies and different meridians. And therefore, if you've got a weakness in the muscle, it's usually because there's a problem, either mechanical or it may be related to a deficiency or a toxin or a viscerosomatic problem. So if you can fix the underlying problem, the muscle then goes strong, and when muscles are in balance, joints are in balance. See? I was struggling with Jill the other last week or so, and she'd got a problem with her foot, and no matter what I did with the foot, it didn't seem to get right, but it always showed to a lateral talus. Now, we did the meridians with her, and we found it was a kidney meridian, which was wrong. And then I remembered my applied kinesiology, because I'm a diplomat, and that there are a number of muscles related to the kidney, and the main one is the psoas. And then I remember, whenever you've got a weak psoas, you get a lateral talus with it. And so I was a walking disaster, because every time I corrected the talus, it just came back again, because the psoas was wrong, and the psoas is a lateral rotator. And of course, the foot was doing the opposite. And I said to her, "Jill, I know you've got one foot sticking out and the other one's coming in, you know." And that was, I should have remembered that immediately when you saw that. There's a weakness, of course, in the medial rotator and lateral overpowering. So, she'd woken up with some pains during the night in the kidney area. And you all think, oh, psoas is related to the kidney meridian and things. And I had persuaded her the night before, because we were in Beaconsfield at her daughter's engagement party. I thought, oh, lovely, we can have a Chinese meal. I hadn't had a Chinese meal for ages. And we can have a Chinese meal that night, because we had to get a taxi home anyway, because you won't let me know when you have a Chinese meal. We had a Chinese meal, and they said it has the minimum amount of monosodium glutamate in it. Minimum amount, which, you know, could mean anything, can't it? It wasn't over 500 grams. Anyway, of course, what happened is it clogged probably the liver and the kidney up there. And then that was the track. You see, it was a toxin. We traced it back through the eye position. The thing that negated the weakness in the muscle was the eyes to the left, eye position, which was a chemical. So it was a chemical toxin, and that's the beauty of the eye position. So we immediately found out what the problem was. I thought, chemical? What do you use all the perfect makeup, all the perfect toiletries, everything. It couldn't possibly be a chemical. So was it something you drank? No, it wasn't something she drank. Was it something you ate? Yes. And then we went through, and unfortunately, it was the Chinese meal. So that's that for another year. Okay, so whenever you've got it in yourself or your patients, you know, it's simply just knowing these armaments of techniques that we can show you. Immediately you can say, is it mechanical? Is it biochemical? Is it emotional, etc.? So at the end of it, you've got to get the person back up to as near perfection as we possibly can.